Hello and welcome to The Found Cause, where we have found our cause. And that's silence was in honor of atheism. Our topic today, we found our cause and serve the Lord Jesus Christ. Of course, I am man behind the machine, Michael, and to my virtual front is...
Sebastian, the bookkeeper.
That's probably our smoothest intro yet. Just some silence so we can't mess it up. Again, that was in honor of atheism, which is our daily topic today. And we want to talk about it because it is the religion of the West. It is around us all the time. Me and Sebastian both went to public school. In fact, the same public high school. And we grew up with atheism being the norm. Right? And most people are atheist of some sort, right? I guess atheist is a strong word. We're also mixing the atheist category with agnostic. So that encompasses a much larger portion. Studies and demographic things usually find that atheism and agnosticism combined are around maybe 20%, ranging to 10 to 30, depending on where you are in the United States. So it doesn't, those numbers alone don't show it being dominant. I'm sure the dominant one is Christianity, wherever you go on paper. However, most Christians, quote unquote, are really agnostic. You poke at them, especially children. Ones that aren't adults these days, they're usually agnostic of some sort. Like they're really only Christian on paper. Would you agree, Sebastian? Am I making things up?
Oh, man, yeah. It's sadly, at least in the US, that was the experience that I had, and more so in high school, yeah.
Yes, and so this is, anecdotal, because me and Sebastian, it's just our stories that we've come to see this, and I don't have grand studies to show that, but I would say that atheism and agnosticism really is the dominant religion in the United States. I know atheists and agnostics would probably disagree, especially atheists. They think we're under some theonomic God rule law, and they really are trying their best to stop the theocracy from developing in the United States, but I really think that's overblown. So atheism, agnosticism is what's taught in schools. It's what we see all over the United States. It's what's preached in school. It's what's preached by politicians typically, right? It's what's preached by businesses. If you hear them talking about things that are almost never referencing God, they're referencing, evolutionary theory and secularism. So let's discuss it and differentiate atheism, which is usually a stronger word, and agnosticism, which is the gentle catch-all, and people are much more likely to tell you they're agnostic than they are atheist, at least in my experience. Sebastian, what would you say the difference is between an atheist and an agnostic?
Yeah, so let me actually quote, because as you put it nicely, an agnostic is more gentle in their disbelief towards God. They would say that it is, on a classic agnostic, a true agnostic would say that God is unknowable, that cannot be known by the human mind. So, let me grab here a definition from Merriam-Webster dictionary. A person who holds the view that any ultimate reality, such as God, is unknown and probably unknowable broadly. So that is agnostic. So there's a theme of unknown, not knowing what it is. And now, for atheism, the definition from the Encyclopedia Britannica, atheism is a denial of God or of the gods. So, atheism is the rejection of a belief in God. Mm-hmm. They would say that God does not exist. So, one is more direct, the other one is more shrugging your shoulders.
Yeah, and I think that holds true to how people define themselves. Of course, with dictionary definitions and stuff like that, even political definitions, often the definitions are not always true to life, the way people use them. But in those cases, I think that those are true. So atheists are stronger. They explicitly reject the existence of a God. And then agnostics say, well, I don't know. Who can know? Can anybody really know? Does it even matter? That's what the definitions sound like, and that's really what people that you meet will sound like. I have a theory, Sebastian, that agnostics and atheists, there really isn't a big difference. In fact, they're both part of the same party mindset. They both live the same way. They both live like there is no God. They both live like there isn't an ultimate standard. Agnostics because you can't know it, and they don't care about it, and atheists because they say that God or ultimate reality doesn't exist, and they hate it if it does. So both have different mindsets, and atheists are usually a little bit more evangelical about their beliefs than an agnostic. An agnostic, by definition, doesn't really care, so they're not into preaching agnosticism. But both are part of the same pool. They're both part of the same religion. If you'll grant me that it is a belief system that God doesn't exist, that you shouldn't care about what God exists, and that's just us, it's just flesh and bone and matter and chance, then they're both part of the exact same religion. There's like the hardcore of that religion and then the softies of that religion, but it's both the same bucket. Do you disagree?
Not at all. So just like how there's actual committed Christians and nominal Christians, you're saying, atheists are committed atheists and agnostics are nominal atheists.
Yes, and that's a perfect opportunity to also say that the reason that agnosticism and atheism, that secular religion, seems inflated as far as its influence on society to me, is because a lot of cultural nominal Christians are really agnostic, like I described in the beginning. At least students and people my age that I've talked to in their 20s and stuff, if they are a nominal Christian, that is, that they basically say that they're Christian, they would be hard-pressed to tell you that they actually believe Jesus Christ is real. So if you're in that camp, that's like not even cultural Christian to me. You're really agnostic, right? You're so agnostic and afraid of telling people your opinions, or you haven't thought about them, that you're willing to disguise yourself as a Christian, hoping nobody will ask if you really are. So I think that those should all be lumped into the bucket of as agnostic. So I guess there's stronger agnostics that are ready to tell you that they are agnostic and they don't know and they don't think anybody can know. And then there's weaker agnostics that say that I'm a Christian, but they really aren't.
Oh no. So what's with that conspiracy that Christians are the majority and they're trying to install a theocracy in the US? I mean, I don't know. That doesn't seem close to reality at all, since many are just nominal.
Well, frankly, yes. But two, I think the gripe from atheists is that a lot of our laws are based on the Bible and based on biblical reasoning, which is true because that's where justice comes from, but that's a whole different debate. So I think at the core, and what we're not going to discuss today, not in detail, is the whole principle behind the fact that atheism can't have a moral stance, or falsely has a moral stance, but it doesn't really, whereas Christianity is the only, or at least a form of theism, real direct theism, is the only way to have real morals, real reality, real opinions, and make things worthwhile. So if you don't have an ultimate reality, you're not even sure that you will not float up into the atmosphere, when you wake up tomorrow, because gravity might not exist, right? There's no constant. You've observed it in the past, but you haven't seen it tomorrow, so you don't know if it will be there tomorrow. There's no governing force. So atheists, of course, don't live like atheists. They live like theists, because they get up in the morning believing that today will be like tomorrow, as in the atoms will still function the same way, electricity will, and not even just the laws of physics will hold them down, but I would be hard-pressed to find at least the common atheist, common agnostic, who doesn't have a moral stance on things, right? They believe that rape is wrong. They believe that murder is wrong. They believe that stealing is wrong. Perhaps not in some circumstances that they've justified, but they almost always have a stopping for morals, whereas just at baseline, there is no moral in atheism. There's no moral in agnosticism. There's just nothing. There's just the unknown. Who's to say what's good and bad?
So that's interesting to point out then. Someone who professes to be an atheist or agnostic or whatever it may be, they can have moral values, which, as you say, we live as we do, but they have no foundation, nothing to justify the origin of those values.
And I know a lot of Christian apologists like to make that the center of debating atheists, and I think it's a valid way to, because, of course, it's personal, right? It's attacking somebody's character to say that they really don't have a reason for why they should have their morals, and it gets people excited, especially agnostics who are hard to excite by nature. So there's merit to that. I just didn't want to make this whole episode about that, because you could go really into detail about that kind of reasoning, that kind of presuppositional apologetics, that they do have a moral want and they just are suppressing it. But I think this will be a more cursory episode about who are atheists, what do they believe, what are our thoughts on it, and how do you share the gospel with them, at least at the surface level.
Okay. So sounds good to me.
Yeah, and we've defined atheists, right, the stronger of the secular religions. We've defined agnostics, the weaker of the secular religion. Let's talk about secularism himself, and let us defend why we're calling secularism a religion. So just some background on the word secular. It's a division term. It means dividing the church from something, right? So either from the government, it's typically how it's used, right? A secular government is one that doesn't have a particular church at its core, right? So the Church of England is the Church of England, the country, or the United Kingdom, the country. That church is not secular because it's not divided from the state. Whereas these United States in America, we have a secular government because the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, has an explicit reasoning that at least the federal government cannot make a law establishing a religion. So because it can't establish religion, it is technically secular.
Now, does that mean that the country cannot have an official religion?
Well, and this is a side tangent, but no, because the Constitution, it arguably only applies to the federal government, at least when it was initially created. So when it was initially created and ratified, even post, when the states had been together in the Articles of Confederation, they had official religions. For instance, Virginia had an official religion of it's Anglicanism. What is Anglicanism called?
Episcopalian.
Episcopalian. Okay, I always forget it because it's non-existent now. Episcopalians. They were officially Episcopalian. Okay, and probably going to misquote, but I'm pretty sure Massachusetts and others had their own official religions, like Reformed Baptist or whatever. In any case, when the Constitution was ratified, those states continue to have those as the official state religion. But notice that it's the state that had that as the religion, not the federal government. So that's interesting to note, at least as far as things go in this country.
If I may point out as well, the emphasis on secularism by the fathers was not so much in the fear of religion, but rather going back to the Middle Ages in Europe, and also, as you pointed out, the Church of England. European countries like Denmark, Sweden, and even Switzerland, surprisingly, they had the Church of Denmark, they had the Church of Sweden, Church of Norway, and before then, in the Middle Ages, during the Holy Roman Empire, it was the emperor who appointed the bishops. And those bishops served both as governors. Hence, in the Holy Roman Empire, you have archprince bishops. Not to get too nerdy in the history, but it was both the bishop that served in their clerical role and in administering justice and order in society. So that's what the fathers were. Speaking from the U.S. perspective, that's what they wanted to avoid when they intended to make the state secular.
Exactly, and I think that is wise. That is a biblical principle that you want to separate, that the government is God's deacon, right? But it is separate from the church authority. So the church authority has a realm of authority that should be, ideally, untouched by government, and the government has a sphere of authority that is given to it by God and untouched by the church. So if you have a bishop of a church, or a ruler of a church authority, elder, whatever you want to call it, that is also a government ruler that makes the laws and executes justice. That is a mix of those two spheres that I think is inappropriate, at least here in this country is what we have determined is inappropriate. That form of secularism is not what we're talking about. So that form of secularism is typically, it gets confused because that's the official term and definition for secularism, is doing that kind of form of government. However, secularism, in a rallying cry to get the church out of life, it has become much bigger than that, and that's why I would call and I have been calling the word for the religion of atheism and agnosticism is secularism. And they would probably not fight too hard to agree that their movement is called a secular movement because they want to get away from the church. And that mindset, I would say, is its own religion. It has become much more than just meaning that the church is out of government. It means that the church has no place in your life. So it's a personal choice. I am secular. I have decided to seclude myself from the influence of God, the church, for whatever reason, right? I don't know that he exists, or I hate him, or I believe he doesn't exist, or whatever. That's whatever you want to choose under the banner. You have chosen to seclude yourself from the church and the influences of religion in general. You are now a secularist.
Hold on, Michael. You were saying, that it is a religion, but atheists say that it's a lack of belief in God.
Oh, of course. Their whole crusade is against religion, so how could they say they've got their own?
Right. But what they really want to emphasize is that this is not a religion that they have, but rather, they want to diverge the blow by saying, no, we just lack belief, which is playing really a semantics game. That's what I also want to point out.
Mm-hmm.
And it is not very honest, because both sides, I believe, can come and make their cases. Obviously, we have a bias. I believe that the case for Christ is much more reliable and stronger. But it is fair to call it a religion, because when you take a stand on something, you believe that. To say that you lack of belief, that doesn't really exist. You cannot not believe in something. You believe something is false. You believe something is not real. So I know that, what I'm trying to highlight here is that in daily speech we say I don't believe this or I don't believe that, but in a psychological level, you really don't not believe in something. You believe something is not right. So, for example, I would say I don't believe in the tooth fairy, but in reality, in a real level, what I should be saying is I believe that the tooth fairy does not exist. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and you'd be willing to hold to your belief, hence it is a belief, right? Like if somebody said that if you don't admit to everyone that the tooth fairy is real, I'm gonna, charge you $5. You'd be like, well, I mean, it depends on how much you value $5, but I would be like, no, why would I do that? Charge me $5, you weirdo. So you'd be willing to stand on the belief. And same for an atheist, right? He's willing to stand on his belief. Many will attest, atheists and agnostics alike will attest to being ostracized for their strong opinions, especially atheists. They have a strong opinion. So they are willing to stake things for their belief. And frankly, I don't think it doesn't destroy the secular narrative to say that it is its own belief form. So the only reason that I can think of that secularism and secularists, atheists, whoever, the evangelists of the secular religion, the only reason they constantly refrain that they don't have a belief and that it's not a religion and all this type of stuff is twofold. One, it's because there's so many different atheists, right? They all have different opinions on different things, from tons of different political views, tons of different moral views, tons of different backgrounds or exact reasons that made them come to secularism, to atheism, to agnosticism, whatever it is. However, I mean, you can say the same thing about Christians. They're not necessarily united on politics or morals even, depending on how we read the Bible, or many things, right? Or how we came to Christ, of course. Those vary all over the place. So I don't think it's fair to say that the variance in atheism means that they're not united in a belief. Secondly, and I think this is the main driving factor for why they're so adamant that they don't have a religion, they don't have a belief, is because if they do have a belief, it's attackable, right? And if they have a belief that's attackable, they have to play the defensive at some point in the argument, at some point in their life, at some point when they're preaching on the street corners about atheism. So the tactic is really just to avoid being on the defensive. In politics, they say always be in the offensive, always be in the offensive when you're debating. They're really just looking to avoid being on the defensive and having to justify why they are atheist, and instead say, no, you justify why you are a Christian. And that is where you really need to prove to an atheist that, or you don't even need to prove to it. Just assume that he is lying. He's lying even if he doesn't know what. He does have a belief, and so he is liable for defending his belief. Now, of course, so are you as a Christian, so don't be like always in the offensive too and doing the exact same thing he does to him, but don't let him stay always in the offensive. He also has something to defend. It's atheism.
Right. And so there is foundation in Scripture to say that it is a belief. So it is not just us telling you this, but take it also from King David, who was inspired by the Spirit to write this down. And I'll read from Psalm 14. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt, their deeds are vile. There is no one who does good. The Lord looks down from heaven on all mankind to see if there are any who understand, any who seek God. All have turned away, all have become corrupt. There is no one who does good, not even one.
Yep, so you can see atheism is not a new thing, right? God hatred is not a new thing. And not surprisingly, considering it's pretty quote-unquote obvious conclusion, right? If you don't like God, well, who is this God? I've never seen this God. It's time to not listen to him. And I don't like the power that people that believe in God have authority over me. It's not a newfangled thing. However, I will say, it's had such a surge in popularity these years because of principally one thing, and that is the mythology behind how the world came to be without God, right? That didn't exist before. Right? The basics that an atheist could say is, well, I don't know how things happen, but I just don't believe in God because I don't want to, right? And, well, you can live your life like that, and people did. It's not very convincing. It's not very erudite, right? It doesn't seem very scholarly. It's not very researched, so it doesn't go very far, right? It basically just goes for you. These days, of course, there is a extensive mythology about how the world came to be without God, how people came to be without God, how morals even exist without God. That's the atheist religion, the secular religion has slowly, or maybe quickly, depending on your time frame, they have quickly developed a series of doctrines that are thought out, right? And they've got an extensive mythology on how things came to be. So the atheists, the secularists, can now be erudite. They can now argue in a street corner without just one defense, right? They can now do these things, and not only can they have done these things. They preach it in schools, and they preach it on television, and they preach it in movies. They preach it in songs. Secularism is a religion with doctrine, and here's the doctrine, right? That there is no God, that 14.8, although it changes all the time, billion years ago, the world came into being. Some big bang, some mysterious matter explosion created everything there is, and that slowly over time, this matter condensed into the suns that we see, and those suns created all the different forms of elements that we see today, and that those elements slowly coalesced into planets, upon which one planet, Earth, is the one we live on now, all coincidental, all by chance, and that physics is a constant. It has always been. It never changes, right? At least according to its own rules. And that we on the Earth have also been constructed as a smashing of random atoms together, random elements together. Now, of course, the theology is still being worked out and exactly how life came. There's a couple different theories, but they're not very consistent. So there's a theory of abiogenesis, how life came to be without God. So abiogenesis, without life. And they don't make any sense. Even to scientists, they're not happy with how these scenarios play out. Because most recently I was in a science class where they described abiogenesis in college, and the most recent construction of it was that electrons attracted platelets, clay platelets on the bottom of the ocean floor. All right, these became electrostatically charged, like they had a charge, and that those charges attracted particular atoms that were floating around, or particular elements that had been floating around, that would then cling together statically and create long peptide chains. Now, these peptides were created solely and only through a process that involved lightning striking a certain pool of elements that were sitting in the oceans at a certain time, at a certain distance from each other, that would heat up and create one chain of peptides, and that these peptides would then somehow make it down to the ocean floor and connect to these platelets, and eventually they would pop off these platelets again by random chance. And also this all had to be happening in a volcanic tube, because they needed to pop off these platelets and then start rising up to the surface inside of a volcanic tube. On the side of these tubes, lipids, which is the thing that forms your cell's boundary, okay, those are lipids. That lipids were being formed on the side of volcanic tubes, because the only natural way that we know of lipids forming in nature into chains is on volcanic rocks. That's why it has to be happening in this volcanic tube. Anyways, these things also happen to break off at the same time that your peptide chain that formed in the clay is going up. And they enclose the peptide chain in a bubble, okay? And I could go on and on about how ridiculous this is, but eventually that bubble, they don't have a way for that bubble to become life. They just have some general feelings like, oh, well, maybe once we have this bubble with amino acids with peptide chains inside of it, maybe it would start to replicate on its own. Like maybe by chance one of the chains does something, right? Like reproduces itself somehow, and then that one proliferates across the world. And once it's reproducing, best reproducers, they survive, and eventually down the line, life keeps adapting until here we are today, 4.2 billion years later, with working cells and all that. And that's the mythology, right? And the mythology goes further into how long ago the dinosaurs went extinct, and how humans came around, and who our ancestors are. And it goes even into as far, if you read science journals, as like who our ancestors are and who mated with Neanderthals, and were there large interspecies wars between Homo erectus and Homo sapiens, and all this jazz, right? Like all this prehistory mythology. I mean, it is mythology because it's not proven. It's total conjecture. In fact, it's kind of ridiculous conjecture.
Michael, I'm getting vibes of time-traveling Jews and Atlantis.
Well, it is, and it's in a veneer, right? There's no time-traveling Jews. People don't just scoff immediately when they hear it, but it's equally as ridiculous, because the time-traveling Jew thing from spirit science, if you grant them the base of what they're saying is true, right? Like if you just grant them that the histories that they found underneath the pyramids or whatever it's all based on, that those are from thought, right? If you grant them their one premise, then everything else comes out true, right? Like you just, if you grant them the base of their story, it's not like it's straight illogical. Like the things they're saying could happen in some fantasy world. It's just that they didn't, and we don't have evidence to believe they did.
Right. So let me touch then on why I think, in my opinion, why I think it is problematic to be a Christian and concede on that point, or to be a Christian and say that, yeah, evolution could be possible. God could have made the world this way. Because I would say, first of all, the bubbles occurring on their own, and all the amino acids and all the lipids joining together. No. Don't give me
There's
that.
a lot of problems. I can go into detail. Like the lipid layers are single. They're called monolipid bilayer or monolipid layers. I'm forgetting the scientific name, but they're one layer of lipids. But in every known cell that we know today, if it has lipids as its outside layer, it is a bi. Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting all my science words. It's two lipids. It's a layer of double lipids. Okay, around, because a monolipid layer, one single layer of lipids, is super unstable, pops all the time. So even if you have your magic, like once in a billion year cell that's going to self-replicate and it's going to be the genesis of everything, it could pop, before everything is ready, which is insane. And not to mention the peptide chains we're talking about, they're hoping they're RNA, which is a variant of DNA that doesn't have two strings, it's just one string. It itself, the reason we use DNA, our cells use DNA to replicate, is because DNA is much more stable than RNA. RNA likes to mutate often and break itself apart. So even if you have a magical RNA thing that self-replicates and it's in a bubble, a monolipid bubble that doesn't break, it could change so bad on its next replication that it can't replicate again. So it's, neutered. And so it's a pretty crazy theory to think that bubbles like that eventually became life.
Yes, so clearly impossible for them to happen on their own. But what if you throw God into the equation and God is guiding this process? There are problems with that, because if you proclaim to be a Christian, and then you can also watch our episode on evolution, but if you assert that God guided this process over billions of years, you end up making Jesus a liar, because Jesus and the apostles refer back to the Old Testament, to the flood, to the patriarchs, to creation. So if creation is just a metaphor for evolution, then you end up making Jesus a liar, because he refers to these things as actual events that happened. So that would be the problem. Why, as a Christian, you shouldn't concede that point. You can watch more on that on that episode. But to the matter at hand, yes, it is a mythology, and it should be critiqued. You shouldn't just take it for granted.
Yeah, and it's not a niche thing. I wasn't super experienced with Christians that did believe in evolution, because I lived in a very small bubble. I just didn't meet many Christians in my whole life, right? I met mostly atheists in public school, so I wasn't meeting with a lot of Christians who I believe really were Christians, who also believed in evolution. So it's just me mostly. But there is a large portion of Christians who are real Christians. Like, I would testify that they're really Christians, but they grant the mythology at base, right? They grant that the world is 4.8 billion years old, that the universe is 14.8 billion years old, and that we were created over the slow process of adaptation over millions of years, even, the most recent strain of humans. And first of all, of course, it doesn't fit with the Bible. So we talked about that in the episode you're referring to, Sebastian, and I would encourage anybody who is disagreeing with us to go back to that episode or look up some strong creationists out there that would talk about young earth creationism. But in any case, even if there's not good enough reason to deny it outright, right? And it's a toss-up on whether or not evolution was the way things happened, you have to realize that you are handing the secularist, which is the dominant religion, at least of culture today, you're handing them the big assumption, their spirit science assumption that what thought said was true underneath the pyramid, right? Then they can build everything off that. You are granting them that life could have been created without God, right? You're granting them their premise, or maybe you're modifying it a little bit to say, oh, well, the lipid thing it can't be done, or it's unlikely to be done unless God intervenes or something vain. But if we were living in Norway, okay, or in the ancient Norway, the Vikings are running around believing that Norse mythology was this, that in the beginning there was nothing, the universe was nothing except for one ice giant and one lava giant, okay? These two huge, immense lava giants and ice giants, they fought each other, threw things at each other, and the ice and the lava hit, mixed, and created different planets, and that there's like 7 planets in the world, and that we all live on each one of these different worlds. So if you were a Christian, right, encountering this Norse mythology, and they claim to have evidence, like, oh, well, there's lava and there's ice today, so that's just how it happened, right? When like water meets lava, it turns into rock. So there you go. There's our evidence for believing it, right? This equivalent of what evolutionists would say today, more sophisticated, of course. And then you're like, well, I'm just not sure. These Norse scientists are so smart. Even though this goes completely against the Bible, maybe God did do this. And then not only do you think that in your brain, you go out and preach and say, yes, well, we all know that ice giant and lava giant did create the whole universe. But remember that God really made them first. I mean, first of all, you said moronic because you're against the Bible. Second of all, you're really not saying anything different than the people of that society had heard before. So why would they believe you and not their old, Norse mythology guy who's been telling them all these things for years? What you're saying is not even different. So you're not differentiating yourself as a Christian by granting the evolutionary premise, and you're giving the pagan, the secular guy, his whole worldview. You're giving him that, yes, there could be life without God. There could be this earth without God. There could be humans without God. I mean, it's ridiculous and dangerous.
Yes, and there's a foundation there as well, that whatever belief that they may hold, if it is the evolutionary perspective or something like, if it's an atheist, actually not an atheist, what am I saying? A new age believer, they have a presupposition coming in. And just as they're coming with a presupposition, they might claim that they have it on reason and science, but that is not the case. So you're aware, you cannot prove evolution using the scientific method, because the scientific method is meant to test something that is replicable in a controlled environment. Test things.
And you can't replicate history, right?
Right. So you would have to demonstrate it using a legalist approach, through witnesses, through evidence, any written testimony perhaps. And I mean, as I said, revise our episode on evolution if you want more information. The evidence that they might try to bring up to make a case for evolution is very weak.
They'll act like it's strong, right? And we teach it everywhere, so they have the cultural intimidation. But yeah, I would say reference our creationism episode on this one, because we can get into a giant rabbit hole here. Right. Important to note, all this said, so you grant them the premise as a Christian or whatever, the secularist himself typically almost always knows that his belief is terrible, right? Whether it's consciously or unconsciously, we know from the Bible that every man knows God, so he just suppresses that knowledge of God. He hates God. He can become ever more a God hater as time goes on. That's from Romans 1, right? So in their soul, they know that God exists and they're rebelling against him. They know what good and evil are because of that inherent. They are created in the image of God. So of course they believe in right and wrong, and they can't escape that fact. Because of this, I don't think secularism, though it is long-lasting these days, it's lasted for, I'd say 100 years now, in the United States at least, it is not a lasting religion, because twofold. One, it is rebelling against the true God. So what religion is a long-lasting religion against the truth, right? They'll never withstand God's truth. Secondly, it has no hope, right? Not only is it baseless, it also doesn't have any hope. What's the hope in secularism? That one day you die and will be worm food? There's a growing movement called secular humanism, which is attempting to put hope, put morals, put the religion-y side of things onto secularism. And it essentially says that we can have morals because people decide what they are, right? We can all decide to better humanity by not eating each other, not killing each other, respecting people's rights, letting people speak, having freedom of speech, all that stuff that we like and we built off of Christianity. Let's steal it and put it just saying we all agree to have it. And if you've noticed the recent increase in the love of space and escaping and aliens coming and showing us new technology, that is the escape for secular humanism, is that humanity will be our own gods, right? We will overcome disease and death eventually through creations, through AI, and uploading our consciousness to an everlasting computer network. And even when stars die and we run out of metal to make these computer networks, we can go to other stars and other galaxies and eventually live forever, if not ourselves or our sons or daughters. Somewhere down the line, humanity will be its own god, an everlasting, undying species that spreads across the stars, right? That's really the core hope of secularism today, and that's why there's such an interest in space, and not everybody that's interested in space is, a crazy secular zealot, but that's the emphasis and core of the hope of secularism. And truly, it's a bad hope, because we can see, especially as you get older, 50s and 60s, that you're not going to see this grand evolution in your lifetime, and therefore there's no hope for you. Even if you think that there'll be hope for your great great grandbabies, you will have no hope, right? You'll die and rot just like everyone else. So and you've seen this anecdotally, Sebastian, too. It seems like hardcore secular people often also, despite all their skepticism about religion, also readily accept New Age things.
Yes, and some of the things I've seen are a little bit cringy, but yes, the biggest thing that I've encountered, and as I mentioned before when I shared my own testimony of my background in an earlier episode, how I was also an atheist. Mm-hmm. And I want to say atheist, not agnostic, because I believed that the belief in God was stupid. So atheist. And something that was enticing during those days to me were aliens. I thought it was really interesting how there could be other civilizations out there, maybe more advanced than us. Maybe they have some secret knowledge, something. Do they have remnants here on Earth? Some people say, they're hiding in the desert under Arizona, the lizard people. And History Channel, I have no idea why. I love the documentaries that they used to give there. I wanted to watch it 24/7, and at least in Peru I can, because they actually have documentaries. Now it's just ancient aliens. And
yep.
Like, it's painful. I want my Roman Empire. I want my Persian Empire. Where did those go? I think it's like all the people that watched them probably died. So yes. What a shame. What a shame. But anyway. Yes, so really enticing stuff about aliens. I think it's probably the idea of secret knowledge, or something that can propel you forward. Maybe the idea of not knowing, because, as you said, the belief in that we came from nothing, we're just an accident, a cosmic accident, that affects the mind. And no one lives that way. So an atheist and agnostic conflict internally on a regular basis, because if you notice as well, if it's not something like aliens, they give themselves to something that they think is important, like politics. I think a big one is politics, such as social justice, such as a big one, and it's just something I've seen. It's like support for groups like the underdog, like Palestine, for example. You can support Israel, but something I've seen is support for Palestine. And why are we doing this? Why are we fighting for social justice? Why are you saying that there's rampant, chronic, disgusting racism going in the US right now? Notice the words that I use. So if we're just pieces of dirt that are going to die and disappear, as I've had discussion with my relatives before, I often ask, what is the name of your great-grandfather? They might be able to remember. Your grandfather, you remember. Great-grandfather, you remember. What about your great-great-grandfather? What's his name? Or great-grandmother, what's her name? They just shrug their shoulders. What does that mean? Soon you're going to perish. People are going to forget about you. And that's something that atheists really talk about. I've heard, but you can testify as well. Michael, one of our roommates as well, said that he wanted to leave a legacy for his kids. Mm-hmm. Okay, we're welcome to. But in order for everyone to know you, you have to be someone like Alexander the Great, someone like Julius Caesar. If you do something important, even if you have your own company, 4 generations from now, no one's going to remember who you are. So, do you see that conflict in what they claim to believe versus how they live?
Well, yes, and I think philosophically, not only are you probably not going to become Alexander the Great or somebody that will last for eons, but even if you did, I mean, so pretend you are Alexander the Great and you have left a legacy that people admire and you remember for eons. I guess Hitler's remembered for a long time too, and for different reasons. But in any case, you're being remembered. You don't care. I mean, you shouldn't care, because now you're rotting in the ground. So it wouldn't have made a difference to you, the corpse, right? Whether you had murdered millions like Hitler, or done it secretly maybe. He said, no, it wouldn't make a difference whether you're forgotten or known, whether you made a good impact or a bad impact. You might as well have died in your sleep at age 0 because there's no difference to you, right? And you might and this life has suffering. So the fact that your life is entirely meaningless to you, combined with the fact that life has suffering, terrible suffering, right? The ultimate conclusion there is suicide. Because why would you stay in life that has any suffering at all, that will ultimately mean nothing? And first of all, speaking of the same roommate, I've said that very thing, and I said, now of course we as Christians and anybody with a soul advocates that you don't commit suicide because it is murder against yourself, and you are damning yourself, right? If you haven't found God yet, you are damning yourself to eternal damnation. And if you have found God, of course you don't want to miss out on his story for you. You don't want to disobey him by murdering yourself. So all those things said, we know inherently, because of being made in the image of God, that suicide is evil, right? It's an affront against God, and it's bad for us. Even if we didn't care about God, it's bad for us. But if you are an atheist and you want to be consistent, suicide is the only valid option, I think, which is terrible. And a secularist will likely get very mad at you for suggesting that, because it's true and they've contemplated it before and they have to shun it out because you can't live like that.
Exactly. And a great book to go into it. And, you know me, Michael, I like that depressing stuff, the really serious and deep stuff, Ecclesiastes.
Mm-hmm. It's a great one.
One of my favorites, Probably think I'm a weirdo for saying that. I don't care. It's some great stuff. Particularly, I would say more relevant. Actually, I don't know. I don't want to say more relevant. It is very relevant today, I would say, because it addresses how meaningless life is, how pleasure is meaningless, how even wisdom can be meaningless if there is nothing after death. You just eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. So, and even in that sense, pleasure is meaningless, because it's not as if you're gonna die and then you're gonna, like in Hinduism, you float in space and become one with the thing, and maybe you can probably conceive how your life was. Not even then. What an atheist assumes is that you leave a legacy, you had fun in life, now your soul is floating in space, just aimlessly wandering the stars, and like, oh yes, now I'm gonna think back on my life, all the good times I had. No, you can't do that. The good times, the bad times, they meant absolutely nothing in that worldview. And Ecclesiastes really, really touches on those issues.
And you know what it also does? Ecclesiastes also tells you that, because an atheist's excuse almost always, so say you give them the whole suicide talk and they are mad and whatever, and they say, first of all, they disregard the reasoning behind what you're saying, and they're saying, well, there are good things in this life, and I'm going to have as good as the time I can while I'm living, right? If we die tomorrow, let's eat and be merry today. That kind of philosophy. What Solomon tells you in Ecclesiastes is that he did it all. He was king of the world, essentially. He had all the wealth, all the ladies, all the pleasures, all the fame, all the wisdom that you'd want. And it did not satisfy. So you will leave this life unsatisfied. Even here, those pleasures won't be good enough for you. Even if you had all the anxiety and all the pressure because you're currently not king of the world to become king of the world, and then you did, it still would not be enough to satisfy what you're missing. And therefore, there would still be suffering. And you would still have the conclusion that life isn't worth living.
Yep. So the only thing that can fulfill that infinite desire for satisfaction is Yahweh. And I do not mean that, in the satisfaction, I mean that desire in your soul, not just for pleasure. I mean the sense of belonging. You need something that's infinite. Money is not infinite. You will never have enough. King Charles V of Spain, after casually inheriting Austria, the Holy Roman Empire, Belgium and Netherlands, Portugal, and the colonies, Brazil, Peru, Mexico, parts of the US too, in California and whatnot. He said the world's not enough. So you will never have enough land. You will never have enough money. You will never have enough fun. You will never have enough happiness. Just what Solomon pointed out. He did all. So I think now it's a good time to go back to the transition to aliens. And why do I say that? Because this, you cannot, I say this from experience, you cannot hold on to this belief for the rest of your life. You're going to start believing some things.
Yeah, and crazy, baseless things, right? Like aliens. Yeah. Aliens is another topic. Like, if you don't pick up the suicide topic and you just want to make a secularist really mad, say that believing in aliens is dumb, and they will have a conniption, and it is dumb. Like, there are some Christians who also believe in aliens because I guess it's cool or something, but the fact is that we have no evidence to believe in aliens. It's all kooky weirdo stuff, and it's pertinent now considering they've the forgetting what branch, military, Navy, somebody released, Air Force, I think, released videos of UFOs, which is making, UFO lovers start to squirm. Those, first of all, we know as Christians that if there's anything supernatural, it's from the spirit world, and I assume it's something bad, right? Typically. So that right off the bat is dangerous. It's not the aliens you hope for. But even if so if it's real, it's that. And if it's not real, well, of course it's not real, then your hope is dashed anyways. So we as Christians know that these things aren't aliens. Second of all, there's no hard evidence. Like, it's total conspiracy theory. So if you claim to be some grand secularist who only lives on evidence, you've suddenly attached yourself to something that's completely unevidence based. And almost every secularist believes in aliens, almost every single one, and has a fond view of aliens, right? Maybe there's a couple ones that want to build a bunker to survive the aliens because they think they're realish or something, but they kind of want them to come so they can use their bunker, right? Like some doomsday pressure, I'm sure. So in any case, if you attack the view on aliens, it is the typical god of secularism, like the supernatural version of add-on, I should say, to secularism is aliens. If not that, and you can attest to some relatives you have, Sebastian, if they don't add the aliens thing on, or maybe they only semi-add that on, there's also plenty of other worldviews and fakeness vying for your attention, from crystal healing to even just like veganism and an obsession about health, or maybe like Hinduism practices or Buddhism practices about reincarnation. Like, because you've given yourself over to foolishness and you haven't been based in the truth, you are entirely susceptible to the temptings of the enemy, like actually the enemy. So the demons, they will lie to you like they've lied to the generations past and give you false spiritualism that will leave you empty ultimately and make you worse off than you were before. Hinduism doesn't leave you off better than it did before.
Right. And for the relatives that you're alluding to of mine, they were atheists. They were openly atheists. They had abandoned their belief in Catholicism, and now, go figure, one of them has started getting into herbs, into meditation, into energies, and not the good kind of energies, like orthodox energies. Those are God's energies. That's the type of energies that you want, from throwback to our orthodoxy episode. But no, this is like negative and positive energy. Even my parents, they have some salt in the house that's supposed to attract negative energy away from. I'm like, why? Like, where are you getting this from? So the problem with abandoning God is that, and also starting from the believe in nothing or agnosticism or what have you, the first thing that comes and what tickles your fancy, you're just going to put in the basket of beliefs that you have because they are unfounded. If you believe in aliens, there's no evidence, it's conspiracy. Okay, what's so bad about believing in negative and positive energy? Just throw it in the bucket. Mm-hmm. Throw it in the cart.
Plus, you're aching. You're aching for what you're missing, right? You're aching for the supernatural. You're aching for something that's bigger than yourself.
Yes, and part of that is the desire to either communicate with those aliens, because there's people that really, really want to communicate with those aliens through radio, using some herbs like ayahuasca, mm-hmm. which also, I don't know, it seems also that New Age people, just like some skeptics, they want to get on that ayahuasca to communicate with similar beings.
On that ayahuasca, huh?
Yeah. Oh, man. And I don't know. The fact that one side is claiming it's aliens and the other one saying that it's spirits from another dimension, something tells me that there's foul play here.
Yes. If you want to see discussions on aliens, there's plenty of podcasts. I know from, I want to say cultish, but at least Apologia Studios, they've talked a lot on aliens, even some recent episodes in 2020 about aliens and how the encounters mirror each other a lot, like they are very similar, which makes you think that either they're copying each other and they're not real, or they are real and there's a consistent force doing it. And almost always they involve some sexual attack, which is super close to descriptions of New Agers who do astral projection and see spirit beings that also claim to be good, typically, and also devolve into sexual attack. And of course, spiritual lies and all sorts of nonsense.
Yes, but as much fun as I'm having talking about this, notice the main point that they are seeking something, right? They're reaching out to something, and they are not reaching out to God, and also just taking it from a logical point perspective, not just from a moral one, but logically. Should you be reaching out to beings that could be superior to you, could be infinitely more malicious than the worst human here? You don't know anything about them. Why? Who in their right mind would think that, it's probably a good idea to reach out to them, and see, even though they could control my mind, take over my body, who knows what those advanced aliens could do? Who knows what those beings from the other dimensions could do? You know what? I'm going to take that risk and expose myself, my mind, and my body for that.
Yeah, well, think about the same people are probably in the Elon Musk club of like AI will take over us all, so we have to be careful about how smart it gets, because once it's smarter than us, we'll be unable to stop it, right? You'd think the same for aliens.
Right, but there isn't. So what does it tell me? That the craving is stronger than the ability to think it logically. So that is, I would say, I'm saying it out loud. I'm actually coming to some realizations myself. So I like this discussion. However, in addition to believing in aliens and energies, there's also a lot of belief in items, like things that have not power, but actually, I'll just say it's power. Like they can help with fertility, they can help with luck, charms. I think that's what it's called in English, right?
Yeah,
charms.
Charms.
Yeah. That gets under my skin. Isaiah, I'm pretty sure also got under his skin. So,
well, Isaiah speaking for God. I know what you're about to quote. So, also under God's skin.
Yes. And oh man, for this, Isaiah is criticizing. In Isaiah 44, he's speaking against those who make idols. Idols, carving them out of stone, carving them out of wood.
Yeah, this is God speaking, so straight from the word of mouth of God.
So, it's really long, so I'll give you the synopsis first. So, there's the God is through Isaiah explaining how the idol maker gets all the resources, could be it wood or stone, how he carves it, song and whatnot. So I'm going to start from verse 14. He cuts down the cedars, or perhaps took a cypress or oak. He let it grow among the trees of the forest, or planted a pine, and the rain made it grow. It is used as fuel for burning. Some of it he takes and warms himself. He kindles a fire and bakes bread. But he also fashions a god and worships it. He makes an idol and bows down to it. Half of the wood he burns in the fire. Over it he prepares his meal. He roasts his meat and eats his fill. He also warms himself and says, I am warm. I see the fire. From the rest he makes a god, his idol. He bows down to it and worships. He prays to it and says, Save me, you are my God. They know nothing. They understand nothing. Their eyes are plastered over so they cannot see, and their minds closed so they cannot understand. No one stops to think. No one has the knowledge or understanding to say. Half of it I use for fuel. I even baked bread over its coals. I roasted meat and I ate. Shall I make a detestable thing from what is left? Shall I bow down to a block of wood? Such a person feeds on ashes. A deluded heart misleads him. He cannot save himself or say, Is not this thing in my right hand a lie?
Indeed. And how ironic that the religion, secularism, that is so against believing in a sky daddy, right? Another thing is these frilly little fairy tales would so often also devolve into idolatry of the ancient days, right? Taking a rock and saying, this will heal me. This inanimate object is actually more than it looks like. It is my God, right? Or it is a God, right? Because these pagans, typically, when they're cutting out their own wood, right, that they use to cook things and then making it into the God, they don't believe it is the one true God. They just believe it is a God with a power, right, that they've made in and of themselves. And so same with the crystal believer who believes the crystal will heal them via some supernatural power or salt or whatever it might be. They are going right back into paganism that their great grandparents did before, and I think principally carried over because of the spirits that influenced them.
Yes, and also this is very, you might be baffling, how are these people similar to pagans back in the Old Testament times? Very much so. Straight from the mouths of the New Age channel, the crystals have intelligence of their own and are, in fact, in their words, superior to us humans because they are from a higher plane of existence. So, I'm like, is this
from spirit science?
Yep, from spirit science.
Excellent.
Yep.
All right.
Like
both New Age.
So, I did my best in that episode to go as closely as possible and try not to laugh or put falseness in what they said. They claim the spirits, that the crystals have a mind of their own. So, it is paganism. It is something that is detestable before the eyes of the Lord, and it speaks a lot to what Paul said in Romans, that no one loves God, that everyone has turned from him, and they're constantly suppressing the knowledge of God, trying to replace it with a lie.
Mm-hmm.
And oh man, I mean, and I have, before Christ brought me out from this terrible existence, I used to think these things. I used to think these things are fine. I was convinced that aliens were real. I wanted them to be real. I don't know exactly why I would want them to be real. Maybe because, make life more interesting. They would rescue humanity or something like that. I was interested also in the sense of, in the spirituality of Buddhism. Yes. And on that note, there's a lot of interest in nature too. Before I forget, nature, such as natural phenomena, is the Mother Earth speaking to us, trying to tell us something.
Yeah.
That
stop driving cars.
Yep. Stop flying planes.
Stop the 5G. It's giving us corona.
Yes. So where is this coming from? It's myth. It's made up. But as I said, if you believe in one crazy thing without any foundation to it, what's another going to do to you? Let's just throw it in the cart that we're going to check all of these things out. So
yeah, I mean, to be fair, there's plenty of secularists, especially the hardcore atheists, that are virulently also against pseudoscience. Like, if you think on YouTube, atheists are a big thing, and they were especially a big thing a couple of years ago, like maybe 5 years ago. Big community of atheists always refuting creationism and other things like that. And that same community often gets its rocks off these days to refuting pseudomedicines and pseudoscience too. So to be fair, they do come from a knowledge-seeking platform, and so they do call out pseudoscience when they see it. There are some that won't follow this. We're just saying that there's a propensity to fall to that very thing that they hate. And we're both saying, Sebastian, that we aren't hating atheists, right? I hate atheism. I hate secularism because it's a poison and foolishness, just like all other false religions. But ultimately, our goal shouldn't just be to humiliate and mock someone, regardless of what they've done, right? We know that, like you were just saying, you were in a place of atheism and foolishness before. And I know, although I wasn't an atheist, I was a God hater. I was a fool before. And God has been the one to rescue us. So our message to the atheist, to the New Ager, to whoever or wherever you are, is just straight the gospel. That regardless of what you believe right now, every man is called to repent and bow to the true God, who is true, who is the one and only, right? He's created the heavens, the earth, and he's created you. You've sinned against him, which would warrant death. It would warrant your entire destruction, right? Ceasing from this life and pain and death forever after. But you have this chance once, now, here, to repent, turn to God, turn away from your sins, be covered by the blood of Jesus Christ, and live, because he's paid your price. So live and be with him instead of rebelling against him. That's the call of the gospel.
Amen. And he, in addition to just being truth and righteousness and justice, he is also love and mercy. Just like how he is the only way, just as Jesus said, he's the only way, the truth, and the light. No one can come to the Father except through him. Likewise, as you have this need to be right before God, to be in his presence, he is also love and mercy. He not only righteously condemns people for their transgressions, for their wickedness of the heart in our rebellion against him, that we have wanted to be the rulers, the gods of our own lives. He extends love. He changes us. He gives us new desires. He gives us new goals that are good, that are fulfilling, that are proper. And it's even more beautiful when you're in a community of believers in which people that have been transformed by Yahweh himself are changed and work together to carry out his will in this world. So it is so full, for the lack of a better word. Not only are you made right by God through him, but at the same time you are fulfilled. That hollowness, that emptiness that you felt before, he fills that emptiness.
Yeah, and notice how it fixes the two problems with the whole suicide question, right? The suicide question for the atheist is, why go on living? Because not only is this life not satisfactory, as Ecclesiastes would testify, and even we ourselves living can testify, it's not satisfactory. There is pain and suffering here. Answers that with that God will create a world without the suffering that we see here today, but also here is enough for you. Like, there is satisfaction in God. While the riches and women and fame and all that and strength and wisdom, all of that can come and not satisfy you. God, even in this life, can satisfy you. Not only that, but God also grants eternal life. So the question of when I die, does it matter that anybody remembers me or nobody remembers me, whether I did good or bad? It only matters if you live forever. And in God, there is eternal life, and without him, there is eternal death. So it does matter what happens here, either for the better or for the worse. And so it solves, God, the truth, solves the suicide question.
Amen.
And that is why we have found our cause in serving the Lord Jesus Christ. Thank you for watching. I've been Michael the Man behind the machine, and to my virtual friends have been
Sebastian, the bookkeeper.
Thanks for putting up with a little feisty episode here. If you want to see the rest of our episodes where we've talked on subjects ranging from Eastern Orthodoxy to how to date, we've got over 40 episodes now on foundcause.podbean.com, where you can find all our episodes and download them for your listening pleasure. You can also go to facebook.com/foundcause and see all of our episodes uploaded there, also on YouTube and also on Spotify and iTunes and wherever you find your podcasts or whatever you want to do. No videos up yet, just videos of a blank screen with our podcast, but maybe one day me and Sebastian will show our lovely faces and you can bear witness to my COVID infested face with beard and uncut hair and all that. Have you had a haircut, by the way, Sebastian?
Yes, my father did a very nice job.
Oh yeah? Oh man, I had my mom like cut the back of my neck like so that I don't have an insane mullet, but I'm scared to do more than that. So all right, until next time, thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.